todo el tiempo posible para que los ponentes.
Let's try to make the most of all the time we have available so that the speakers can, during this last opportunity, develop the idea of where we are and where we're going to in regarding Europe. I believe this is going to be a very interesting panel, not a closing panel, because if we were able to reach a conclusion, then we would really earn our wages, but it's going to be an interesting point to know what the situation is nowadays, and now when Europe has changed so much. And I share with the rest of the members the optimism. It has changed also in a way that is not so much perceived in regards to institutional issues, decision-making processes. Even though we have the same framework, we've changed our budgets, the geopolitical situation of Europe enhanced by a need. But what we face and what we see nowadays is that the need has allowed us to progress in a significant manner, and now we're able to learn the lessons that allow us to foresee Europe where we have to put in place necessary changes. To be able to know how we need to change things, it will be important to go back to everything that has been said throughout these days. It has been a very interesting session, and we can nowadays have three voices that can be helpful. First of all, they can help us see how the idea of a federal Europe that is progressing towards a stronger union of its people can be something that we can work on based on the foundations of the last 50 years towards this changing future that I mentioned before. The idea is where we are regarding the discussion, to be able to discuss how we are able to progress. And finally, we are going to try and close this cycle by speaking about how we will do things in the future in Europe. I think many of the things that have been said throughout the week are very interesting, but I'm not going to go through them. I'm going to now introduce the next panelist. It's an honor and a pleasure to share this panel and to give the floor to Giorgio Anselmi. He has been active since 1979 in the Federalist European movement, a family that I feel I am a member of. He's Italian. He's heading the national president since 2015 to 2021, and he is now the secretary of the Verona section. He has the experience of women and men that have been fighting for what they included in the Ventotene Manifest, and that is to maintain this open light, always working to, first of all, and I believe this is very important, not give steps backwards, and secondly, to move towards a future of cosmopolitanism and political capacity in and outside their country that brings us to this project. So, Mr. Anselmi, thank you, and you have the floor. He will be speaking in Italian, and you have interpretation. First of all, I would like to thank the High Borrell for inviting us because since the year 41 we've been fighting for the federal unity of Europe. I would like to apologize because I'm not able to speak in the wonderful Cervantes language. I did a Spanish exam in the Milan University, but I really don't feel the capacity of speaking in Spanish. Leo Pardi said that there's one only a way of not showing your limit, and that is by not showing them. And I try to be true to what the great poet said. We need a new political science for a completely new world, something that we never thought we would see. We're in the center of a fast moving river, and we, in an obstinate manner, look at what we see at the borders of the river, while the current is pushing us and bringing us towards the abyss. This from Alexis de Tocqueville is something that Spinelli really liked, and he included it in the Manifest of the European Federalists written in 1956. I believe that today we have to start by reflecting on what is happening in Europe and in the rest of the world. We need to reflect in a new way, not use the categories of the past. And let me start with one of them. In Italy, in Europe, in the US, wherever we speak of the new Cold War. The Cold War and idea that, as Weber said, is a mistake nowadays. It's not a Cold War, because a Cold War was a Cold War between worlds that were separated. On the one hand, the Western world, and on the other hand, the communist world. This separation doesn't exist anymore. The world has become a community that has a common destiny, whether we like it or not. So, if half of the world disappears, then the other one disappears too, because they fall over them. So a challenge at the time between the USSR and the United States was a political one, but not a scientific, a market one, not taking into account the capacity of giving goods to its citizens. The market was able to improve or was better than the Soviet one. There was no competition there. The US, up to the film, even the film Ninochka showed this, the Russians coming to the Western world would see the abundance that we had. Third element, then there was an opposition of superpowers. But now we have a pluripolar world with many elements and many persons that want to have an important role in the world scenario, whether we like it or not. So limiting the opposition to China and the US is functional for the US, but not for a new world balance. With what other ideal do we have to substitute the Cold War? Let me make a proposal. Those that study international relationships, as well as historians, use a term, constituting a war. And what is this? These are the wars that end one order and see the birth of another world. They become another world. We've had two. We had the one of the 30-year war till 1648 that ended the universal ideas of the Middle Ages, and with the Westphalia Peace became the system that we still refer to. and the second 30-year war, 31-year war, 1914 to 1945, with everything it meant, the victory of communism, fascism, and Franco in Spain. All of these elements that end the system and mean there was a bipolar system. But now we find ourselves before, and this is said by those participating, because the war in Ukraine is not only fought in Ukraine. We've talked about a new era. The ancient world has disappeared, but we still don't have a new world to be able to create this new world. In the past, there were wars. Nowadays, it's not possible to have a third world war, even though Pope Francis has spoken about a third world war happening in small parts, and somehow this is what's happening. But these wars are long and difficult. It's difficult to win these wars. Let's think about Germany in the 30-year war in the 17th century. They lost a third of their population, and there were four powers involved. Let's think about the First and Second World War and what happened in the period between wars. Second aspect. These wars can also be concluded with a commitment between the powers, but never with a commitment on principles, because there can be no compromise there. The 30-year war ends, and there is an end of religious wars in Europe. Catholics, Protestants, Calvinists, Lutherans, this ends. After the Second World War, there is an idea of borders not being changed through violence, which is what is happening today. In the same way that Germany, Italy, and Japan tried to do after the First World War. And we also have powers that are reviewing history. The conflict nowadays is between nationalism and federalism, understood in a broad manner. By federalism, I understand all those that want to reach peace and create a new order with rules and rights that have to be respected by all states. I have the pleasure of reading what Mr. Kimani, ambassador of Kenya before the United Nations, said. He had just identified this new war after remembering that Kenya and most African countries were born after the end of colonialism. He added, "We were not the ones to decide on our borders. This was done by faraway cities like Paris and London, without taking into account our culture." Today, divided by the borders of their countries, we have peoples that share cultures and languages. If at the moment of independence we would have decided to build states based on religious, ethnic, or racial homogeneity, we would have had horrible wars. But we've decided to make use of the inherited borders, but with political, legal, and economic unity. Instead of looking back in time with dangerous nostalgia, we've decided to look towards the future and to the big things that we are able to create. And this is what we have to do in Europe, not look backwards, but looking towards the future and the greatness that we had never had before. That's why in the Ventotene manifest we say that this is a step forward and that we need to think of a world unification if we want to survive as the human species. What is happening today against the NATO being extended is said by Americans like Anne Applebaum that married a Polish diplomat. Kiev wants to become a democracy, and this is a challenge to the imperial nostalgic, dangerous nostalgia, as I said before. Putin is everywhere, and it's closer to the socialist empire. Ukraine is going against this existing as a state. Ukraine has become a very dangerous rival. The evolution of the dignity of Ukraine when the corrupt president at the time was in the country was the kind of revolution that is feared by Putin. He knows that if Ukraine is successful in its fight for democracy and for being part of Europe, then Russians could ask themselves, why don't we do that too? Tom Friedman from the New York Times said that he's convinced that the behavior of Putin is based on two problems. First of all, he's not been able to assure a sustainable growth for Russia, which means that he now is an avenger of dignity in Russia. Secondly, Ukraine cannot become part of NATO nor part of the European community either, because then he would have at the border wonderful economies, and this is nothing positive for him. How can the small Russians be more successful than the big Russians? That's why this has become a permanent war. And it's not through chance that we're not respected. Europeans are considered to be weak, that don't accept the logic of the power state. We are corrupt consumers, and this is how we are defined. And this is something that has been mentioned through different narratives. Europe, or the European Union, better said, could have a very important role in the world scenario, but it has to abandon a mirage. Let me tell you, friends from Spain, that is the dangerous nostalgia that I mentioned before. I have a friend, a young federalist that has developed his career in Europe, and we were speaking lately, and I said, Francesco, you live in Frankfurt, you've been living there for a long time. Are Germans understanding that the dream of Europe as the big Switzerland is something that doesn't exist anymore? And he said, Giorgio, with everyone I speak with, no one accepts the fact that we cannot be Switzerland, but we can't be Switzerland. We can't be an area of peace, prosperity with a continent that is affected by wars, crises, and revolutions. That was Switzerland, but we are not them, and we are not surrounded and protected by the mountains with a neutrality respected by the other powers till the Napoleon, because that's the reality, because Switzerland later on became a confederation. So if we would decide to become Switzerland, the other continents wouldn't allow us to do so. We see this with Putin, with Erdogan, and with China that wants to be in our ports. So this is a dream, but this is dangerous because we are a peninsula of Asia, separated by an internal sea, the Mediterranean, surrounded by ex-empires that want to be so again, the Ottoman, the Russian, or Soviet later on. For our supply, we depend not only of Russia, but also Middle East, Africa, one of the most unstable areas in the planet. And moreover, Africa is the only continent with demographic growth. Therefore, we have to provide a solution to these problems, because if not, the Africans will want to escape the territory. A great philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, said there's an invincible enemy that doesn't fear death. An invincible enemy for states. Who doesn't fear death? That is terrorists on the one hand, and migrants that are starving. They have nothing to lose, and that's an invincible enemy. But to abandon this idea, we have to accept the return of tragedy. Emmanuel Macron has spoken 4 times of the return of tragic elements in Europe. Was born in Athens in the 5th century before Christ, and not by chance there was a fundamental element of what being European today means.
Because there was a rebirth of philosophy, and then it went to Greece. We do not convince. We do not. We have to convince, and that's how European origin lies. Aristocrats, democrats, where the rival is going to be chased by ostracism, and that's where tragedy lies. When talking about narratives, any kind of political battle is a great culture battle. Dear friends, we do not win if there is no cultural victory. Herodot states that, and talk about his history, the Persian War, and there is the Scylla tragedy, the Persian. What does Scylla says in this tragedy? I don't like those Greeks that meet up in the squares, debate and trade among them. So I don't like Greek individuality, the Greek exceptionality or exception, a region where there is no king, where there is no hatred. So going back to recent times, tragedy is unavoidable in the political arena. Max Weber says that inner of politics is a vocation, and I quote Max Weber. To the tragedy consciousness, we can relate any kind of act we thought in the past, because Europe today has accepted the consciousness of tragedy. We are evolving. It's going to be terrible what we have ahead of us. We will see that. Of course, why couldn't we agree with Putin, or as we are agreeing with Hungary? Another issue is the relationship with the US. It is we have seen that in a G20. Many countries do not accept this anti-Russian crusade. Okay, I've got 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm going to close my intervention. So the major challenges we face in order to have another Zanderberg towards the worst today. The Mediterranean area is a new border. It is a very sensitive issue. It is a border, and we see in the deals that with Macron, Sanchez and Draghi, we have got a great border there, and the energy discourse is of major importance. And also, this is vital for Africa, but it's not going to be an hegemony of Europe over Africa. This is an old world that is non-existent currently, and so it is a world that is coming to an end. And to close up, I would say that a few days ago, on the Saint Bartholomew's night in France, as you might already know, many Gunners were killed by Catholics. So we saw the creation of a new trend, the end of the laicism and the end of the religious war. A small group at the beginning, and their idea got stronger and stronger. And in Westphalia, we had the Federalists. And who are Federalists today? Those who resisted to have the states as the master of Europe. And so they looked ahead and they said they won't win. Second episode in 1944, the European defense is set aside. Altero Spinelli writes in its diary, we only are two believing in the Federal Union of Europe, myself and Jean Monnet, but we are the ones who are going to win. Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie tante. Mi dispiace avere questo terribile mestiere di far...
Thank you very much. I apologize for having stopped you. It was really, really interesting. And you have closed with a great touch of optimism. I love these relations between the Huguenots and the laicists and the Federalist European movement. It is a very good image. Thank you for these words. We have to see what have been the proposals of the Federalist movement in Europe, in the EU, and it has been mentioned by our speaker. Thank you, Giorgio Anselmi. Beyond Europe's configuration and beyond its defense and safety, there is an idea of Europe that has given us a great strength. But I guess we will see how this strength is seen in real terms and how we can see it in the intervention of Guy Verhofstadt. It is a great honor to be sitting at this panel. I deeply admire Guy Verhofstadt, and it is for me very difficult to introduce him without talking about the fact that he has been a prime minister during 10 years, and now he's at the head of a group at the head of the European Parliament that has a name that means something, to renew Europe, and comes from the continuity of the liberal group in the European Parliament, and has broke several barriers. When he was as a Prime Minister of Belgium from 1999 to 2008, and the way of functioning, the way the European Parliament works, and I will stick to this only because otherwise it would take me too long, because we could talk a great length about him. He has been considered as the president of the future of Europe. And my question is, how do you see Europe in the world today? And what would be the three things more in each of the major domains that would have an importance in today's world, and what do we have to change? Thank you. You have your slides if you want. Adrian, you can help me, please.
Thank you. No, that's okay. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I want to thank especially. I hope that it's working. No. Nevertheless, I have a good voice, so I exercise every day in the European Parliament. So, okay, it works. So thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Josep, for inviting me as a director of this event to this important Quo Vadis Europe seminars. And also my apologies that I will not speak in Spanish. Nevertheless, I live in a city that Spaniards know very well. I live in Ghent. I live 50 meters from the place where Charles Quint was born. But I don't speak Spanish, so I apologize for that. But I have to tell you, Charles Quint, he spoke fluently Dutch. My mother tongue. That was the language he was most used with Dutch. And it was only Spanish for I don't know what religious reasons, and I think it was French when it was for diplomatic reasons, and then I don't know what other language for other reasons. So my point will be that certainly since the start of this brutal aggression of Putin in Ukraine, but already before that, already since 2014, because in fact the war between Ukraine and Russia didn't start on the 24th of February 2022. It started already in 2014 and maybe even before that. It's not by accident, for example, that Putin was recognizing these two independent republics in the east of Ukraine on what date? On the 21st of February. And then the war started on the 24th of February. Why the 21st of February? Because on the 21st of February, Yanukovych in 2014 lost his majority in Ukraine, and there was a pro-European majority inside the Ukrainian parliament. So for him, that was a symbolic date, the 21st of February 2022, 8 years after Yanukovych needed to leave the country, to in fact recognize these two republics and start the war with Ukraine. But what it shows is that the world, since the brutal invasion of Russia and of Putin, has dramatically changed. It's the start of a new world order and the end of an old world order. And you can say that since the Second World War, we got the Cold War, as we call it now, until 1989. And then from 1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we got the so-called supremacy of free market economy and liberal democracy, even in such a way that Francis Fukuyama wrote a book about it, saying it's the end of history, finished. There is no evolution and development anymore. Free market economy has won economically, and liberal democracy has won politically. And in the meanwhile, we have seen that it was not the end of history, and that we have entered in a new area since 2014, since 2022, since the start of the brutal invasion. And I call it, I wrote a little book about that already in 2008, and the name of the book was A New Age of Empires. What we entered have since 2022 is a world of empires. Forget the world of 199 nation states sitting around a big table at the UN headquarters in New York. It had never existed, in fact, that world. We live in a world of empires in which you have 4 or 5 competing empires with each other, not only military, but also politically and also technologically. And the question for today, the key question, the existential question today for us is, what is the place of Europe in such a world? It's not the world of Fukuyama anymore, where liberal democracy was accepted by everybody, and there was an increase in democracies every year in the ranking. You know that these rankings, and we could see since 1989 that there were more democracies than the year before. That's not longer the case. The opposite is happening. It's not longer the Cold War of the Soviet Union against the United States, with in the middle the European Union or the European idea. No, it will be a world of competing empires, empires of the good, autocracies, empires of the bad, and a big fight between autocratic empires at the one hand and maybe democratic empires at the other hand. And the question, the existential question, is what is our place in it? There are many people who say, but there is no problem. There is the predominance of the United States. We can always count on them. I'm not sure about it. It could be that tomorrow Mr. Trump is coming back. If I see the results of the primaries in the US, it's not impossible that in 2024 we have back Trump, who's making a big power deal with Putin about the world orders and where we are in this game. So I think in this new world of empires, the key question is, what is our place? What we want to be? How to defend our interests? And our interest can be the same interest and values for the moment as the United States of America, but tomorrow they can be different. If Trump is coming back or another I don't know what, lunatic, twittering president in the United States. So, and this new world of empires that I want to describe you is the real environment in the future. Don't make a mistake. What you see, for example, China, that's not a nation, that's not one of 199 nations. China is a civilization. It's Han, the Han civilization, with inside several hundreds of ethnies and nations. And the same is true for India. India is not a nation. India is a continent. Has in total 2,000 ethnies in its borders. Had at the same time 20 different languages they are using. There are 4 big religions in India. And at the same time it's the biggest democracy, more or less democracy for the moment in the world. So that's not a nation with one identity, with one language. No, there are 20 languages. There are 4 big religions. There are 2,000 different ethnies in India, and they are a continent. And that's the same for Han, for the Han civilization. And in America it's the same. And Russia wants to become an empire. That's the world of tomorrow. The world environment has completely changed, and it's not longer the peaceful, liberal, democratic environment in which everybody can say, oh, everybody accepts our values, our principles, our liberal democracies, our rule of law, and it's only a question of competing economically between these different nations. That's not longer the environment. The environment is a power struggle between empires on the global level, not only politically, but also militarily, and at the same time, also technologically. And the question is, if we want to defend our model of life, our interests, our values, our principles, we need to reform drastically the European Union the fastest as possible. This European Union is not fit for the future. This European Union will not survive even the coming decades and the future. Because the European Union of today is in fact not a union. So I'm apologizing towards Josep Borrell, who is the High Representative of the Union, saying that there is no union, but that's the reality. The union doesn't exist. It's still a patchwork of intergovernmental patchwork of a number of member states governed by one principle, the principle of unanimity. And if there is no unanimous idea or behavior inside the European Union, nothing is happening, or everything is happening with in remote, you know. It takes some time before we act. In a world who is going faster and faster, a union that is not a union, but that continues to be a system based on unanimity cannot work, because you are always acting too little, too late. That is exactly what has happened in every crisis we have seen since the last 20 years. Be it the migration crisis, be it the financial crisis, in the beginning even in the pandemic, always acting too little, too late. This union is not fit for the 21st century, and certainly not fit for the new age of empires in which we have entered, certainly since the brutal aggression of Russia. And my question and my introduction of today, or my speech of today, because I have still left a lot of minutes I have seen on the desk of our moderator, is that we need in fact three big reforms inside the European Union to make this European Union fit for the future. To become an empire of the good, and it's not for us to become the empire of the bad. There are enough empires of the bad, China, Russia, eventually others, and to stand for our interests in the world. The first is that we need, as fast as possible, to create a European defense community in Europe. By the way, that is not a new idea, the European defense community. I had the possibility, I told it to Josep, to read again the old treaty of 1952, because our founding fathers had already in mind to create a federal European Union, and in the heart of that European Union to create not only a steel and coal community, but also a European defense community. And it is the parliament, the national parliament in France in '54, that's the baddest day of Europe, I would say. There are a number of bad days in Europe, but the most baddest day in Europe was on 30 August of 1954 in the French National Assembly, who voted under the leadership of Pierre Mendès France, who was the Prime Minister at that time, against the idea of the European Defence Community. European Defence Community already at that time as part of NATO. So there is no opposition between the European Defence Community at one hand and NATO at the other hand. Already in the 50s, the idea was to create European Defence Forces and in the heart of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And because Stalin disappeared in '53, and the French had the atomic bomb themselves, and was it still necessary to do the European Defence Community? But in the meanwhile, dear friends, Stalin is back. Stalin was dead in '53. Stalin is back, and we don't have a European Defence Community. We are all individual members of NATO, not capable to defend, in fact, the European Union against a threat from outside. And it's a scandal, because what I want to show you now are two slides about European defense to show you how stupid we are behaving for the moment. The only who is not behaving stupid is Josep Borrell, who has tried the last months to do the EPF, European Peace Facility, to have a common purchase of weapons for Ukraine on the European level, not on the national level, and to start with the intervention force of 5,000 European soldiers the fastest as possible. But that's the only thing we have on the European level. Nevertheless, we are spending an enormous amount of money. What I show you here is in fact the balloons of the military expenditures worldwide, from today on. And you see the big spender is naturally the US, but the second big spenders are the EU, even without the UK, because with the UK we are spending more than China. We are spending more than China with the UK, and without the UK we are spending more or less the same as China. And at the same time we are spending four times more than Russia. You have not the impression that we spend 4 times more than Russia. So that are the military expenditures worldwide. The US, we know, they are the big spenders on military, and we are, together with China, the second one, 4 times more than Russia. And at the same time, that's my next slide, if you look to the number of soldiers, we are even the champions for the moment. Here inside this figure of nearly of Russia, there is not in the increase of the number that has been announced by Putin yesterday of 130,000 additional soldiers that he wants to enter in the Russian army. But we are the champions of the world, the most number of soldiers in the world. At the same time, the second, together with China, big spender on military, and what we are. We don't exist when it concerns military. And when Ukraine is attacked, it are mainly others who have to do the job. And the reason for that is simple, because there doesn't exist a European defense community. We are spending more or less 35% of the Americans, and we can only do 10% of the operations of the American army. So we spend 35%, and you can only do 10% of the operations. I'm a lawyer, I don't know nothing about mathematics. Nevertheless, I was Minister of Budget when I was young. But I'm always saying, to be Minister of Budget, it's not needed to know something about mathematics. The only thing what you need to know is the word no. That's the only that's the only thing what is a quality for a Minister of Budget. But even I, as a lawyer, know that if you spend 35%, 40% of the Americans, you can only do 10% of their operation. You are 3 to 4 times less effective. And why? Because we are duplicating everything. We have in Europe 130 different weapon systems. The Americans have 30 weapon systems. The Russians have 30 weapon systems. No, we have more, 130 different weapon systems. And at the same time, we have cooperations with each other. The Spanish with the Italians with the French with the Germans, the Belgians with the Netherlands, naturally, etc., etc. And we think that it will solve something. It solves nothing at all. And this whole discussion, in my opinion, to say that we need to increase, in fact, the spending on military will only increase the duplication. Only increase the duplication. It will change nothing on the ground. It will not change nothing in reality. The only thing what can change is to go back to the initial idea of the Treaty of 52, signed by Adenauer, by Schuman, by De Gasperi, Mr. Anselmi. He was the Italian who signed the Treaty of 52, creating a real defense union. At that moment already, you have to read it if you have the time, go to internet, go to the European Defense Treaty of 52, because you're going to see how many warplanes we could have, how many tanks, how many armored vehicles, how many soldiers we wanted to put into this common endeavor, as I said, the European pillar of a NATO, instead of a NATO with so many individual countries as we have today. And that's the first thing to do. Stalin is back. He died in 53, but he resurrected in another name as Putin. And we needed to do our job, because tomorrow there can be an American president who's saying, I'm an isolationist. I don't want to interfere. I have enough of American lives dying for Europe. We will not interfere like we did it in Kosovo, or not support anymore Ukraine, as it is the case, or not help because there is an attack against one or other Baltic states. So we need to get or act together ourselves, the fastest as possible. And a good basis for it is to go further in the direction that Josep has started the last 2 years, to create European forces, to create European defense community, and to create and spend this money, this nearly $240 billion without the UK, because before Brexit there was war, in a better way. The second one I want to say is we need also to take our place on the technological field. We don't exist in the internet and in the web world of tomorrow. We exist, I can show you a little bit who is producing the data. Here you have an idea of who is producing the data on internet, and you see that with Asia, China, India combined, and Australia, we are the second biggest producer of data on the internet, the Europeans. A small part of the world, but creating as much data as whole China, India, 3 billion of people in the world. But then the interesting story is the following. Who is making the profit with our data? Here you have, in fact, the stock market value of the internet social fora from today. The red is America here, so you know them all, the Microsoft, the Apples, the Amazons, the Facebook, Zuckerberg now called Meta, and so on. And then at the other hand, the Asia with Alibaba, other big names, Tencent, Samsung, that changed all the time. And then I hope that you have your glasses with you, because otherwise you don't see Europe. That's the yellow here, that little one. So nearly a little bit bigger than Africa, we are. That's the stock market value. The biggest there is, maybe you can read it. If you have really good eyes, you can maybe read it. Is a SAP. That's our biggest internet company in Europe. SAP, that's in fact an accountancy firm for accountancy programs in Germany. I told that once, that story, with a guy of SAP in the room. He was not very pleased that I described how I described his company as a purely an accountancy firm, selling accountancy programs. And then maybe if you have really good eyes, you see an S here. That's Spotify. That has become a little bit bigger now. And some of you think that's a mistake, because normally is Spotify not an American firm? No, it started as a Swedish firm, but to grow and to be existing in the world, it went to America. It became successful, and then it came back to Europe and rolled out its model in Europe. And why it was necessary? Well, Spotify is a good example why this is happening. In Europe, if there is somebody here in the room with a fantastic idea to start a new mobile app and to be successful and to be as rich as Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates in the future, well, he needs 27 authorizations of 27 national authorities. And he needs to make 103 agreements with mobile operators, because in Europe we have more than 100 mobile operators. So what you do is you take your idea, you go to the other side of the Atlantic, you make one deal with FCC, Federal Communication Commission, FCC, there's one authority in the United States. You make a deal with the 3 big operators, mobile operators, and you roll out your mobile app. And you become rich. And then you say, yeah, in fact, I love Europe. I go back there, and I will roll it out also in Europe. So everything has been said until today about, we are going in the good direction. We will take our place in the modern world on Web 3.0, because everybody is now talking about Web 3.0. Meta is in fact the start of Web 3.0, in which I don't understand it anymore, I have to tell you. Already Web 2.0 was too difficult for me, but I'm a lawyer, so that's maybe the reason. But Web 3.0 will be a world in which it will be very difficult to know if you are in the virtual part or in the real part in the future. Well, it will be completely dictated by American technology on the one hand, of maybe Chinese one. And the Americans are those who are collecting our data and making profit with it, or the Chinese one, they are collecting the data to make a surveillance and a control of their citizens. That's the way the whole system works. So I don't want neither the one, neither the other. I want the European model. And to make a European model, we need to have one authority to decide on it. In the past, it was the case. You remember maybe that everybody of you got what? Nokia, Ericsson. You remember that? That were the good times of mobile. Because there was one European standard at that moment. GSM was a European standard. Created a European industry. And that was the biggest mobile operators, I would say, producers of mobile apps in the world. Ericsson and Nokia. And still today they have something to defend. Since then, we lost it. no competition, only competition. We are neutral towards technology, and that's the norm. Neutral towards technology. Americans are not neutral towards technology. The Chinese certainly not neutral towards technology. They're only the naive Europeans who are neutral towards technology. What we need to do is to develop our own system. And I think blockchain could be a basis for such a system. Why? Because in blockchain, you keep, in fact, the ownership, the property of your own data. What is not the case in the other two systems. So the fastest as possible, develop our own system with one authority, a European FCC, a merge of our mobile operators, and stopping thinking that, oh, we need to be the ideal place for competition for the whole world. No, the world will not work like that. It will be competing empires. So in competing empires, thinking that, oh, we can the playground of all the others for economy and for market and for technological developments is a wrong choice. Because the world is not one place. It will be a competing place of empires in the future. And then my third point, so I have no slides about that, is if we do our work on defense, foreign policy, and so on, if we do our work on technology, and that's also about supercomputing, about artificial intelligence, about Web 3.0, about the next 5G and 6G. We are capable to do that. The Europeans are one of the only, the Americans are not capable to develop, they are busy to develop 6G. But we are discussing if it is not necessary to let in Huawei. That's what we are doing. Instead of saying, no, we have our technology. A technology common developed by Ericsson and Nokia, and let's develop it in the future. And so that means that besides that, and the technological challenge we have, there is a third one, and that is to create institutions in Europe who can work, who can make it happen with one authority in technology, with the European defense community, with a European democracy that it can act faster than it is today. And that means a number of things. That means, for example, ending unanimity inside the European Union, inside the Council. Every time deciding with 27 before you can do something that makes that, for example, the Americans can decide with an executive order of Biden an immediately ban of Russian oil within 2 weeks after the start of the war. And we need, 3 months to discuss that. And then, even then, it will only start by the end of the year. So that's the difference between the same for the financial crisis, the same for the migration crisis. I'm now giving the example of the war in Ukraine, but the same is true for every other field where we have still these unanimous decisions that are needed by 27 member states. That is absolutely not done in the world of tomorrow. That you need weeks and months of discussion before you can act. So ending unanimity, making qualified majority as the basis for every decision in the European Union, merging the post of President of the Council and President of the Commission. Instead of what is happening now, they are always arriving with two, not knowing who have to seat where, as we have seen with Sofagate was in Ankara, I think, or in Istanbul. I think it was in Ankara that thing happened, and at the same time creating a real European democracy with transnational list, in which you, as people of Spain, can not only vote for Spanish representatives, but also for your European leaders. And that can be, somebody from Kent, for example, would be a nice idea, because Charles Quint was born there, as we all know. So that's my message to you today. We are at an existential point for the survival of Europe, of the European Union. There is a need for an urgent reform, and if we don't do it, we risk disappearing. If not under the umbrella of the US, it will be maybe under the umbrella of Russia or other autocrats. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. What I'm going to, perdón, lo que voy a hacer.
What I'm going to do now is to immediately give the floor to Josep Borrell. I don't think I need to introduce him because I'm sure he's been introduced on many occasions throughout the week. But I have to say that the fact that we see him often enough here is something that we should highlight because he shows a deep interest not only in speaking but also in listening, sharing, and interacting, which is the basis of what we do in Europe. So thank you for organizing this, for this initiative, and for inviting me. So I give you the floor, and then we will open the floor for a Q&A session, and then we will go back to the panel to see if we can finish by 12. Thank you. Josep, you have the floor. Just to make things more lively, I do have some comments. Can you hear me? Nope. I don't know why it's in green and not in red. Now you can hear me. Yes, I do have some brief comments. First of all, I would like to thank both speakers. Well, you've seen the academic depth of a professor with his intellectual references of the thinkers that have been part of the construction of Europe, and at the same time the political passion of this wonderful man, Guy. I think he's the best political speaker that I know. Yes, he started his political campaign here today. Isn't that so? And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Guy was one of the persons that was proposed for the head of the commission, but mainly the British were opposed. And I understand this. If I had been British, maybe I would have been opposed too to his presidency, because Guy is a real believer in Europe, a federalist. He believes that Europe has to become more unified, much more unified, and the British, and not only the British, then there were others too that shared the British thesis and didn't want to become more unified, and that, Guy, is the problem. You explain things really well, and I share your ideas of what you've been explaining, because the union is not fitted for the century. That's probably the best way of saying it. We're not adapted to the world in which we live, but there are many states that are part of the union, of this club of states, that do not share this view. I believe they're extremely wrong, but that's their viewpoint. But it's always wonderful to listen to the voice of the academia and the person that sees Europe as a political architecture and has a commitment with it, and the person that has been president of Belgium. Others with less than that have become the president of the European Council. And we always listen to Guy at the Parliament with the attention needed because of his commitment with Europe. And I'm sure you have all appreciated having them both in this closing ceremony. He comes from Gand. He doesn't understand really well why Charles V became Charles I in Spain. But this is Charles I of Spain and V of Germany. That's the way in which we studied it when I was in high school. But for them, it's Charles V. He got to Spain when he didn't even speak one word of Spanish. Not even one word. Yes, probably German, maybe, or Dutch, like you. And then he learned languages. He learned French, Italian. He ended up learning Spanish too, and German. And he always said that you needed to use different languages to speak with different groups. For example, to speak to women, you had to use French. To address men, especially warriors, you had to do that in Spanish. To speak to horses, you had to speak German, and you would address yourself in German to them. And he divided. Had a division there. The first thing he did when he got here was to behead those nobles that rebelled against him, like Padilla, Bravo, Maldonado, all those that went against the emperor that was giving the positions to the Flemish, because the archbishop, for example, didn't speak Spanish either. So he beheaded them, he imposed himself and created the empire. I live in Brussels, close to a statue to the Dukes of Egmont and Oms that Philip II also beheaded. And there it says a monument to the victims of the Spanish barbaric times. And everyone in the Flemish world knows that the Duke of Alba cut the heads or beheaded those who were going against the king. But no one knows that Charles V also did this when he got to Spain. This is a part of history that we don't go into. So Guy, be aware of this for your next time. Remember that everyone has beheaded everyone when they needed to do so. And I repeat something that I continue repeating. We spend 4 times what Russia does in defense, as much as China. So amongst all, we spend 4 times what Russia is spending on defense. It is true that they have nuclear arms, but our armies cost us 4 times the cost of the army in Russia, and even the same as in China, where they have the first or the best fleet, best than the American one, and we have more soldiers that are very useful for demonstrations, but that's it. But and to see them in parades, but they are not a power equal to the one of the U.S. or China, and all of this is a consequence of not having one army but 27 armies, and 27 armies do not add up to one army. And he reminds us that Europe started with defense, or that's one of the proposals at the time. There was an attempt to do so because the U.S. was also interested in this. Let's say everything. The U.S. was interested in rearming Europe to have a power that could stop the Soviet Union. This was part of their interest. Things didn't work in this way, and we should remember this because of the anti-natural combination of the French communists that obviously didn't want to reinforce anyone before the Warsaw Pact, and the de Gaulle members that didn't want French soldiers to be under the command of German officers just 9 years after the end of the Second World War. The wounds were still open. So we couldn't have French soldiers at the order of German commanders. So things didn't work out, and French socialists also voted against this idea. And when building a military union, things didn't work. So then we started with the union of borders and customs, and that's how we started to become united. But as Guy has explained, now we have the empires, the Soviet and Tsar's empire almost, and China also considers itself an empire. Even Turkey. Even Turkey sees itself as a regional power that has an imperial will. And what Turkey is doing in the Caucasian area, in North Africa, Libya, Syria, and even in the African Horn. It's a country with a fragile economy. You have to see what's the evolution of the currency. You can see that they are not very stable, but they have this will and a military industry. Russian drones have solved the problem in the Caucasian area. They're vital for the Ukraine war. Sorry, not Russian, Turkish, I meant. So an innovative military industry and a will to be present in a military manner, also bringing their soldiers, having boots in the ground and suffering losses. We Europeans are training the troops of others so that others are part of warfare, even though it's foreseen in the treaty. The treaty foresees the deployment of combat missions. This is not something outside our legal limits. We've never done so. We've never deployed them. We have cooperation missions with others, but always maintaining ourselves on this side. And this is a problem that has to do with the culture we've inherited from the Second World War, of the second and long World War. And this is something difficult to overcome, because going now from we have 27 states, and this is going to be difficult. And also, there are many European countries that still believe that their defense, their security lies fundamentally on the Atlantic Alliance and the protective umbrella of the US. And the idea of a Europe of defense is not something appealing to them. They don't think it's enough. So that's how Eastern European countries see things that have a long experience of dealing with Russia, as well as the Baltic countries that have suffered occupations and wars, mainly Poland. The idea of developing a Europe of defense, I always find the same idea when I talk about the non-NATO agreement and the possibility of progressing when creating common defense structures. They always say, and what about NATO? Well, nothing's happening there. NATO is here and Europe is here, and they can be complementary. But the mindset of many of the European countries is that all effort made to build the Europe of defense is done instead of contributing to NATO. So that's what makes it difficult. When we pass the strategic compass with caveats and so on, we made clear that the main instrument for our defense is not the European army, that is still to be created, but NATO. And behind NATO we have those who at the end of the day are the military superpower. Have you seen these figures on how much does the US spend on military? And this is not the expenditure of 1 year, but of many years accumulated with structures and capacities that are nuclear, conventional. There's 7 fleets, American fleets throughout the world, but they don't have that many soldiers. If you look at the relationship, I know you're a lawyer, but I'm sure you can divide. If you divide between the expense and the people in the military, you will see per capita, per person, how much do they spend, and they spend much more in the US than what we do. We have more soldiers and less expenditure, so we have more parades and ceremonies, and they have more capacities. And this is one of the big things to be dealt with by Quo Vadis Europa. Do we want to have a role and that's the role of not being a big Switzerland? Do we want to be something beyond this? Torreblanca explained how the rest of the world saw us. They so we will see how we contribute to peace, human rights, development in small dosages, not to change any reality. But is this what Europeans want to be? Or do they want to be a military power that wants to not impose things through force, but have enough force to defend its reason? And that is, I believe, the big question, a cultural and political question that all citizens have to reflect on. The EU is not fit for this because it was born to avoid war, in fact. To not be in military conflicts, to suppress war. But war can only disappear. You face a world as the one described by Guy, with when you have these empires that Guy described, those that want to go back to their past, saying, I was a great empire and I want to be so again. And to do so, I mobilize my means, and mainly my military means. In this world, Europeans do we want to develop our own capacities? Because yes, we will always be closer to Washington, but sometimes the interests are not the same, and it will depend on who is in government in the US. We won't always maybe agree with them. What would have been the response to Ukraine war if we would have had a Trump in Washington? What would have happened if instead of Biden we would have had Trump? And what would have the Europeans done if instead of agreeing with the attitude in the US, we would have had a different vision or attitude like we did in Iraq? When Europeans, not all Europeans, but we could say the old Europe. Who was the American that called it the old Europe and New Europe? Cheney? Yes. The New Europe is with us. The New Europe is with us. That is the new member states of the EU. The Eastern countries are with us, and the old Europe isn't. And that's what happened. Spain was in Iraq, but as soon as the government changed, we flew from there. So this is one of the big issues, and that's why this session was so worthwhile, and it deserves a big discussion, because that is the issue, that is the question. What do we want to be? How do we want to be operated, because we are not adapted to the speed of the events that are happening. Thank you. We have a half hour now. We have 30 minutes, as I was saying, for a Q&A session. I see that there are many women that want to ask questions. I hope that you do so. Please make your questions brief. Usually we are able to summarize in a better way, so I hope we can do this. And I would like to start with my own question.
We have been talking about unanimity and also the need of a Europe able to get hold of all its capacity and knowledge, and but it is a Europe where no one wants to unite. Do we have to think about a unanimity, also an inclusion political process for this unanimity, not to mean we act against some, and where the essence of Europe, which is the consensus, a cooperation will be impaired by this. And so I am in favor of I want to put an end to unanimity and in all that has to be decided, but how? This is a major issue. So who wants to take the floor? Questions? We will have to see how many of you are going to be. The first question. So 3 minutes. Okay. Good morning. Do we have the narrative? Do we have the mantra we have to repeat? If it's not from education, or we won't be able to reach a project for a short, medium, and long term, I'm afraid. So yes, there is another question there. Good morning. I've got two questions. One, it is a reflection on a comment from yesterday. Can Europe still be acting as innocent in its politics in the future? Can Europe live in a sort of Disneyland in the face of the European project? And with a slow reaction facing the new situation where we need contingency plans, and it has situations that have been very difficult to foresee. And a second question, closely linked to this condition and situation, the European intelligence is going to be separating 27 intelligences that want to keep their own identities and their own safeties protected from the rest of the countries of the EU. We have been addressing certain cases of interferences, and these cases haven't been well managed or well addressed from intelligence. Thank you. So the mutual confidence is very important. More questions? We take 3 more questions. My questions is more about the citizenship mindset. I think that the Americans or the Russians, when you tell them that they have to fight in Mozambique, but here when the High Representative says we have to lower 1 degree the heating, everybody is shouting against that. Don't you think that the Europeans want to be on the right side of the story without paying a price for that? Thank you. Over here. And stop. This is the last one. Thank you for the presentation, for the talks. I've got 3 questions. And we go to the point. As our Verhofstadt said, I agree with competing in the new economy, but I would like to know what he thinks about the regulatory of Europe. And for him again, we have been talking about the Cold War. We were in a bipolar system, but Verhofstadt has just said that we have many empires. How don't you think a multipolar war is a risk for the citizens? And for the High Representative, I agree with the fact that Europe needs to have its own defense, but in the States we have seen, the US we have seen, it has militarized country. I don't really quite like that, but how can we balance well-being and defense? Of course, if there's no defense, there's no well-being. Thank you. Another question, the last one. Thank you. Qualified majority exists in the Council. Many decisions are taken in that way with the qualified majority. Nevertheless, it's quite rare to use this qualified majority because they prefer to turn to unanimity. I would like to bring about this fact because in a certain way we are giving a major importance on the decisions, but I think what is important is the decision-making process, because our before I think we have to seek these ideas. We have to talk about these strengths, these ideas that can connect the project with citizenships, with all of us. I think we have to talk about what to decide and not so much how to decide it. Thank you. My name is Alvaro. First of all, I would like to thank you for your talks. And I would like to talk about the financial aspects and having this slide on the screen. What is the mission of Europe in the future in this financial context where we have to play a major role in the technological field when on one side we see amongst the citizenship that is afraid against the bubbles, the real estate bubble, for example, here in Spain, and sometimes these markets are quite unstable, and we also have capitals going to other markets as the US, for example, for its high profitability due to a speculation that we are having in the technological sphere. And last question, the raise in the interest rates that is causing great concern, is going to have a great impact on the recession we will be living in short time. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Verhofstadt, I'm not a woman, but I will go to the point. So, President Verhofstadt, the European Parliament, the European Council has presented a communication explaining all what we can do without changing the treaties. And my question is not a short-term question. What is going to happen? How is going to react the European Parliament? What are the consequences for the institutional guerrilla? Thank you.
Estaba una última, pero ya última.
Ya la última.
Solamente subrayar con toda la
Europe is one of the cradle of thoughts and thinking. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment, not only in it was in medicine and literature, but in art, and it was one of the greatest cradle, and this gives us a really great richness and wealth. After the Second World War, we have reached a social equilibrium that is non-existent in other continents. We can see the great differences in the US. They are rich, but they haven't been able to have a social health service, and these are assets we have to defend, we have to protect, and we have to enlarge.
Un minuto allí, un minuto, por favor.
30 segundos. Luque Uribe Echevarría, senador.
Mr. Echevarría, I'm senator. There are some member states that do not agree on going deeper into the European integration. They argue that facing crises as the pandemic or the Ukraine war, European Union has responded in an efficient way. And for example, if for a European Union better adapted to the world in the shape and background, what is this unity, European unity that was expressed by Macron, that is not new? What does this idea mean for you? And do you think that this could bring about a solution? Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to the co-director or co-chair, co-secretary of the course, Paco Fonseca. No one has presented you, I'm sure. I'm sorry. Mr. Fonseca has been working hard in the European Commission for the shape of Europe we have today. I have been a witness of all that. Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. I will give the floor back to the members of the panel. I think that you are a deputy of the European Parliament, and we have to be strict with the time. So as if we were in the Parliament, and we have to stick to the time. We are going to start with Professor Anselmi. It is going to be quite difficult to give an answer to all the questions, but I'm sure there is a thread in all those questions. Thank you. Mr. Anselmi. It has to switch. Yeah, sorry. You have raised a number of questions. We would need about one whole day to answer to those questions. I will be here, so if you want me to answer some questions, I can do that after. So if we want to unify Europe, it is going to be quite harsh and difficult. It is nearly impossible, because the Confederation have had a great success. Only two federal unions and independent states have joined and created a confederation. The United States and Switzerland, they have been through the Civil War 1964-65 and the War of Sonderburg in Switzerland. This war started in 1891, and it became a confederation after a civil war. So the cause of Anselmi is fighting for that. So they know that this battle could have been useless. And second aspect, education and culture. These are major assets. Federalists are keen on that. Jean Monnet said that if he was to start, it would start with the culture, but this wasn't true. This wasn't pronounced by Jean Monnet. The Cultural Revolution is the result of the national state. My parents were farmers. My father came from the concentration camp, and I learned the dialect of Verona, and we talk about Castilian and not Spanish, but we would have to say Toscan and not Italian. So my teacher Italianized me, and now with my wife I speak this dialect. And we talk about national culture. What does this mean? We have this part of European literature that expresses itself in national languages. The cultural movements are European. Petrarch in Italy, or as your own trends in Spain, we have different cultures, but they have a common thread. Before it was said Rome, Athens and Jerusalem, the three great capitals that have created this European feeling and sentiment. I will talk about the Prince of Machiavelli. Do not get away of the good. The politics need that. We have to be well aware of that. We have to look at the reality in the face, knowing that in politics we have to get into the evil dimension sometimes, or if we used Pascal's word, we have no good or no evil, we have a mix of them. This is the terrible human condition that we have to consider as men. And after I will talk about empire, and we have to pay the right price. I've talked about a new era ahead, a harsh winter in all the European countries, maybe not so much in Spain, but in Italy and Germany because of the gas issue. In the words of Thomas Mann, we have to get the young from the enchanted mountain and to get closer to the truth. This is the world we are living in. This is the truth we are facing today. We have to be frank and tell that to citizens. A challenge for Europe, and we'll only say one thing. The alternative of Churchill is butter or canyons. We do not have to choose among those. These have to be Europeans. We spend a lot for a defense that is inferior to the one of the states, so we do not have to choose between butter and cannons. We also have addressed the capital's drain, but also we have addressed a major issue mentioned by Mario Draghi in the Italian Parliament. Parliamentarians said that we need a common defense in Europe, and Draghi, that was president of the European Bank, said that he did not know if we could put the hands of the defense to a central authority, because war is a prolongation of the foreign policy. So we cannot put the peace or the war into the hands of an authority, only one, because we cannot do that. Mario Draghi said that. That's why he said. That's why that if in the European Council we have a qualified majority in the arena of defense, just imagine if we have a mission in Libya or in other country. If the Italian government votes again, do you think that the Italian government accepts that the Italians go to death without the political legitimacy? And there was very well described by Altero Spinelli, and he tried to write the first European constitution. He said to the Gatsby, "What are you doing here? Or we have a European army with an American commandant, or if you want to have a European army, we will have to have a European constitution, because the army is going to obey to constitution." So therefore, we have to consider that. We have to say clearly. Last considerations. You have rightly said that there was a great solidarity in Greece. So, for Benin, a Roman consul said that we, the Greeks, we would have to join forces and Greece conquered the barbarian. And we know what was the end of all that. The Italian Renaissance was extraordinary. Machiavelli in The Princess, Spain, France, and Germany if we Italians we do not join forces, it's going to be the end in 1559. It could happen in Europe. It is not only a question of having a cultural union. We need a policy to defend all that. The generalists will always have been in favor of that. Mitterrand was told that. Spinelli said this has to be the trend. The success of the state was like that because if 9 states of the 13 have ratified the constitution, this constitution will have been enacted. But so if we remain outside, we won't catch up with the rest, and that's what we have to keep in mind. This has always been the case in the European history. If we wouldn't have had the euro, we wouldn't have had the common defense. And if we say we can follow without you, as it has been the case in the Czech Republic or the UK, UK has left Europe, and with the euro we started 11 states, and with Croatia we will be 20. And this is our great major objective, to fight for the ones who want to progress, leaving the door open to the others. We do not want to exclude no one, but we cannot accept, Helmut Kohl told us, we cannot accept that the speed of the train would be determined by the last wagon. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Most of the questions were turning around the whole unanimity issue. Fonseca has even proposed to use the passerelle, but the passerelle exists since the Treaty of Nice. And since the Treaty of Nice, we have the possibility, with unanimity, to go from unanimity to qualified majority. It has never been applied. What has been applied is the opposite. That is that there are a number of issues where there is qualified majority in the treaty, for example, migration, and there the Council decides to do it by unanimity. Yes. And the consequence of it is that there is no decision by the Council, even when the Commission has already put on the table her proposal 5 years ago. The same on Orban. Even there is no unanimity needed. You have to make recommendations, a 4/5 majority in Article 7, paragraph 1 of the treaty. And it doesn't happen. Parliament has asked, after the Conference on the Future of Europe, for a convention. This convention can be launched with a simple majority decision of the Council. It doesn't happen, because the Council says, no, it's better to do that with unanimity. Yeah, it's always better to do that with unanimity. For me, it's always better that every decision that we take on a political level, local level, regional level, national level, is done by unanimity. Yeah? But once a state disappeared because of unanimity, you know? Poland, in the 18th century. In the Polish parliament, there was a rule. The rule was everybody has to agree before we act. They didn't act, they were eaten up mainly by Russia. That was happening. For 110 years, the Polish state disappeared because of inept institutions. And that's my reply immediately to the, I think, Mr. Dea, who said, yeah, but it's more a question of what to decide than of how to decide. That's one issue. If you have bad institutions, you have bad decisions or no decisions at all. So the question, oh no, we need to discuss what we do and not how we do it, is not true. That's one issue. If you have not the possibility to decide, yeah, then you take bad decisions. Bad institutions lead to bad decisions, and that is what we have for the moment in Union. And people are saying, how will you do that? How the Americans have done it. In 1785, they went with the 13 states to Philadelphia, and there they said, 9 of them, look, we are losing the war against the British. we need to stop with this unanimity thing that we have for the moment. And we need to start with American Treasury certificates, Hamilton, you know? And 9 were in favor and 4 were against. So the new rule became 9 against 4. That's still qualified majority in the United States of America because of that decision in 1785. And the 9 said to the 4 others, look, it's simple. Or you leave or you accept. And all 4, including the rough state of Rhode Island, accepted the qualified majority ruling. And since then, there is majority decision making in a federation based on treasury certificates for the financing of that state. We have heard here a number of comparisons with Switzerland. You know what the budget is of Switzerland? It's in principle a confederation, but it's not a confederation. It's in fact a federation. It's 15% of the Swiss GDP. You know how the financial budget is of the European Union for the moment. It's 1% of GDP. And now we increased it, in fact, if we can make it permanent, if we can make the recovery fund permanent, then we double it from 1% to 2%. That is the reality. So we want to be a geopolitical giant in the world with 1, possibly with 2%. America, federal budget is 24-25% of the American GDP. The Swiss Confederation, like I said, is 15% of the Swiss GDP. But we have found the wheel, reinvented the wheel. So we think with 1% or 2%, we gonna do it in the future. So the way to do it is to do it simply, go forward with those who want to go forward, and say to the others, look, you join or you go out. That's the only way to do it. And at the end, the interest of all these countries in Europe is to join. Because what the war in Ukraine shows and illustrates us, there is no security for individual countries in this new world of empires outside the bloc, outside the family, outside NATO, outside the European Union. Then you are the victim, to be eaten by these empires of the bad that will still be there in the future. So that's the way forward. And what we need now is the courage to do that. Take, for example, energy. Why not an energy council the fastest as possible? Every country now is, we have an energy council, an energy union. You have to know that we decided that in 2006 in Hampton Court, last council meeting of Tony Blair.
I was there.
And there we decided, from now on we have an energy union. Since then, nothing happened. The opposite happened. We became more dependent from Russia than before. Because an energy union, that's not an article in the treaty. An energy union means common purchase of energy, common reserves of energy, grids that are interlocked with each other. That is an energy union. Nothing of that has been done. Nothing. But we are an energy union. The same in migration. It was 1999. It was my first European Council as Prime Minister. We went to Tampere, the north of Finland. Dark, bad food, reindeer we eat. Awful things, so I remember that. And there we decided, migration union. From now on, migration is a union policy. It has never been a union policy because in the meanwhile, besides all the efforts of the Commission and putting forward, the Council was not capable to agree on anything. Because why? Because unanimity. So really, it's a moment where break it or take it. It's the one or the other. And I'm pretty sure that there is a far more support in the public opinion than we think. People say, yeah, but in many countries, no, leaders in many countries use that. The anti-European sentiment, but they have changed already. I don't hear anymore Le Pen saying Frexit. Or the Dutch saying Frexit. After Brexit, that was the only good element on Brexit. That is that everybody said, after Brexit, you're going to see Nexit, the Dutch going out, Frexit, the French going out, the exit, the Danish going out. And what we have seen is quite the opposite. In the public opinion, you have seen a reaction of the public opinion saying, no, that's not what we want. The problem of the public opinion is not with the European project or the European idea. It's by the problem of the European public opinion is with the way it is implemented, with the way it doesn't work. That's the problem. People in an instinctive way know that the problem, the solution for the challenges of today lies on the European level, but they don't see it happening. And then they become Eurosceptic, as we have seen in the past. And even in Italy, I hope that it doesn't happen, because when I see that maybe we're going to have a prime minister who find Benito Mussolini a good politician, then I think we need to go forward, making our union, giving it the powers and giving it the means. Thank you.
A la hora precisa de clausurar este curso le damos la palabra al director para que lo haga, y de verdad que muchas gracias. Espero que el año que viene tengamos preguntas adecuadas a una situación que ha dado un salto adelante, y creo que es importante pensar hoy y durante toda esta semana cuáles van a ser las bases para este salto adelante y tener las preguntas el año que viene. Josep Borrell,
muchas gracias.
Tienes la palabra. Gracias a ti por todo.
Muchas gracias, Ana. Esta sesión final ha sido especialmente motivante, no solamente porque las otras no hayan aportado también ideas, impulsos, sino porque creo que
ideas, because at the end of the day we are looking at the intrinsic features of politics in Europe. Governments, and I see this very closely, are protecting their powers. It took many years to be able to go from the common currency, the ECU. Does anyone remember that? I'm sure no one does. Well, there was a common currency, but that was not an only currency, because we each had ours, and then there was another one too. So therefore, with that, we had to build difficult and complex relationships. The serpent in the tunnel, one crisis after another, and it was difficult to go from ECU to euro, a common currency and a unique currency, because there's no other one. Before we had the peseta and the ECU, and now we only have the euro. But abandoning that power and the capacity of setting interest rates to adapt to your situation and to be able to monetize debt is a enormous jump and change, because it means a loss of sovereignty. In fact, you share sovereignty with others in the Council of the European Central Bank. And for many governments, this was difficult. And they said, careful, let's not lose more, because we've already lost a lot. However, they need to lose more, because the European integration implies that European states are less sovereign, so that sovereignty is exercised in a common manner. And what does sovereignty mean today? What does sovereignty mean in the world that Guy has described? Let's go back to when Spain left Iraq. And I said before that we went to Iraq because the government wanted it, and when the government changed, then we left the country. But we left the country because we had a euro. and we didn't have the peseta, then if we would have continued to have the peseta as our currency, then there would have been a massacre to our currency by the other international markets. So as in the same way as Mitterrand's France had to change its policy when they went against their currency. The sovereignty of Mitterrand's France had to suffer the effect of the pressure. So he presented himself to the elections with one policy, and then he had to change it because there couldn't be for him a devaluation of his currency. If we had had pesetas when we left Iraq, and I always gave this example, they would have destroyed our currency, and we would have paid very highly for it. But because we didn't have this currency sovereignty, things were different. So we can say that the less formal sovereignty you have, more real sovereignty you can exercise. You have less formal sovereignty because you are not the owner of your currency, but you have more real sovereignty because thanks to this you can make decisions that you couldn't in any other way. So the sovereign decision of leaving Iraq that confronted you with the U.S. friend is because you don't have your own currency. If not, you wouldn't have been able to decide this, or you would have paid for it. So this is what we have to understand. What's sovereignty today, and the capacity to act on your own. What's your sovereignty to act on your own, and that's for any of the European countries. But the progress towards giving sovereignty to be able to exercise it together faces the resistance of governments that, as any power structure, wants to maintain power, and with the convincing of citizens. And Guy speaks to the citizens. But Orban is in Hungary because he has been elected, and those that have chosen him know how he acts. If they wanted a different kind of government, they would have voted for someone else. The Italians have the option of choosing their government. Let's see what they decide on. But at the end of the day, it's the citizens that decide. Because who decides in Brussels? Well, the governments, the parliament too, but mainly the council that is made up by the governments. And who chooses these governments? Citizens. So at the end of the day, we have to create this European idea and promote it amongst the citizens so that they want to choose governments that want to build Europe. If not, this won't happen. And this won't happen with the 27. In fact, nothing of what we've done has been done by the 27 at the same time. No, we don't have the 27 in the euro, and in Schengen we don't have the 27. So the border and the currency, which are the two features, are things that we haven't done together. And defense, which is the third identity element for a state sovereignty, is not something we will all do together either. And progressing, there won't be a grand jour, this great day when we all believe in the European cause. But the Europe of today is not the Europe of Gand, Charles V, and so on and so forth. The entry in Europe of the Eastern countries and their historical and cultural experience and history has also changed the perception of the world that we have amongst all. And it is very difficult to have a political union and an international policy if we don't share a minimum of perception of the world, if we don't understand the world minimally in the same manner. And people from Portugal, from Lithuania will understand things differently because of their history. So we have to create a strategic European culture that overcomes what we've inherited from history, and from geography and what they've made of us. And the Ukrainian war is a very good example. The behaviors regarding the Ukraine war are not the same in Portugal and in Spain that in Lithuania and other countries. They've given a third of their military budget to Ukraine. That's why the Ukraine war is a game changer, and you've explained this really well, but it's also the test to see what Europeans are going to be able to do. And there's going to be an advantage. We're going to be freed from the dependency of Russian energy when we define our international policy. Up till now, this was a big condition, the dependency that conditioned fully our policy. But now, once we are able to avoid this, if there's no dependency, then our policy can change. But in the next months, Europeans will have to demonstrate resistance, capacity. They will also have to demonstrate that they understand that what is happening in Ukraine is not something that affects only Ukraine, but affects us all. And as it affects us all, we all have to contribute, and we need to continue helping them. And nowadays, the war is in a decisive point. The ones taking the initiative is not Russia anymore. Russia has already lost the war. Ukraine hasn't won it, but morally, politically, and militarily, in 6 months, Russia has lost. They didn't achieve their objectives, their military objectives. They're in a defensive position because Ukraine has received weapons that allows them not to have an offensive like in the Second World War by occupying spaces with tanks, but they identify critical objectives that are very important, and they are bringing the war to Crimea, and they are maintaining, and the Kherson battle will be decisive. We don't know what will happen afterwards, but what's clear is that right now Russia isn't getting things how they thought. In any case, they still continue to have the capacity of limiting us financially, but less and less with time, but they still have that capacity. So Europe has to be able to face the challenge together, and knowing that this has a cost. Emmanuel Macron said this the other day. This is going to have a cost. We cannot just say we're solidary with Ukraine, but please don't bother me. Solidarity cannot be an empty term that is just used rhetorically. I am very solidary, but I don't want to do anything about it. No, solidarity means sharing the cost. That is solidarity. And that will be the great test that Europe faces. And we will see what happens in the next elections in different European countries who is in power. Everything that Guy and Anselmi mentioned are the path to take, but I have to also add that for this we need for governments to want this, and for governments to be willing, citizens have to demand it. They have to demand this when they choose who is in the government, so that when they all go to Brussels, they have the European idea that Anselmi and Guy have explained. So once again, thank you. Thanks for being here. This is the 22nd edition of Quo Vadis Europa. I hope we can make the effort to reach the 25th anniversary, and then we will see what we want to be as grown-ups. Thank you all.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Please don't leave the room, because there's an event that will take place now. And I want to also also thank those people are coming in. I want to say thank you to the interpreters. I want to thank the interpreters for their work and for the work you do for Europe, because without you we wouldn't be able to progress, and thanks to the organization.
Vamos a... Bienvenido al rector de la UIM, ¿qué tal? Encantada. Y ya que nos sentamos un momento. Claro que sí. ¿Sí? No, pero yo creo que hay que... No, quédate aquí. Venga, pues nos sentamos. ¿Qué sería?
Dobbiamo stare. Mi dica lei cosa dobbiamo fare. Sta seduti qui. Sì.
Bueno, a ver si logramos que un poquito la prensa no nos tape, ¿no? Pues muy buenos días y perdonad que os estemos dando la espalda a los que estáis en la mesa, pero queríamos precisamente al terminar este curso, este magnífico curso Quo Vadis, el aprovechar la ocasión para hacerle entrega a Pepe Borrell, a Josep, a cada uno pone el nombre, ¿no? Como él mismo nos decía, en función de su origen y del tratamiento que le da a Pepe Borrell. Queríamos hacerle entrega del objeto que hemos hecho este año para recordar y conmemorar nuestro 90 aniversario. La medalla conmemorativa del 90 aniversario, que se la estamos dando a personas que tienen una vinculación especial y significada con la Universidad Internacional Menéndez Pelayo. Desde luego, Josep Borrell entra de lleno en esa categoría, más de 20 años colaborando ininterrumpidamente aquí con esta universidad, y para nosotros, para el Consejo de Gobierno de la Universidad Internacional Menéndez Pelayo, es un placer, querido Pepe, querido Josep, el hacerte entrega de esta medalla y agradecer.